All right, so picture this. It's the very tail end of the PlayStation's life. The whole world is looking forward to the next big thing, the next generation of consoles. And right then, one game decides to look back. This is the story of how Final Fantasy IX came to be, a true fairy tale born right at the crossroads of old-school tradition and brand-new technology.
Return to the origin. That, right there, was the simple but kind of profound guiding philosophy handed to the development team. A super clear mission on one hand, but on the other, what does that even mean for a series that was famous for constantly changing, for always reinventing itself?
And yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? The one we're going to dig into. Because this wasn't about just making a nostalgia-fueled remake of an old game. No way. This was a genuine quest to rediscover the very soul of what Final Fantasy was all about.
So let's get into that mission. The team had their orders, but this whole return to the origin thing, it was way more than just a simple nostalgia trip. It was really about deconstruction.
The director, Hiroyuki Ito, his take on this is absolutely crucial. For him, return to the origin didn't mean hitting rewind and just copying the past. Nope, it meant stripping everything down to its bare essence, finding out what makes it tick. This wasn't just a design brief someone pinned to a bulletin board. It was a deep, philosophical challenge for the entire team.
And you can see how this mandate shaped every single decision. The core theme was simply life. You know, exploring how and why we live, what it all means. Now, get this. They were building this classic fantasy epic at the exact same time as the futuristic sci-fi Final Fantasy VIII. The two teams had to be talking constantly to make sure they were creating two totally unique games. And if that wasn't enough of a challenge, this was also the very first game in the series to be developed internationally.
And that whole international team thing, it wasn't just some logistical footnote. It was absolutely fundamental to the game's DNA.
So Square literally sets up a studio in Honolulu. And hey, while the weather was probably a nice perk, the real reason was to tap into Hollywood's incredible pool of CG talent. They were looking at the amazing visual effects in American movies and thinking, we want some of that. They were so serious, they actually did a whole test run with another game, Parasite Eve, basically just to see if this kind of cross-cultural experiment could even work.
And oh boy, did it work. The American team, which was about 50 people, they weren't just doing busy work. They were core creative partners. They designed these complex, beautiful cinematic scenes. One of the US designers even secretly added the entire Blackjack minigame, and they even helped co-design the game's final unforgettable boss. So how'd they get past the language barrier? For the most part, they just drew. They communicated through sketches and art, a truly universal language.
Okay, so you've got this deep philosophical mission and this one-of-a-kind international team. But how does all of that actually translate to what you see and feel when you play the game?
It all started from this one creative spark. Producer Hironobu Sakaguchi just gives them that one phrase. The art director, Hideo Minaba, hears it, and boom, an image just pops into his head. The classic faceless black mage from the very first Final Fantasy. That became the visual anchor for everything. From that one character, they designed the entire Black Mage village. And from that village, the whole world just grew outwards. And that character's short, stylized chibi proportions, that became the design rule for every single character in the game.
And this is where art and technology just merged perfectly. That adorable, super deformed art style wasn't just a creative whim, though it was partly inspired by the exaggerated look of stage plays. No, it was also a genius technical solution. See, on the original PlayStation, if you tried to make realistically proportioned characters, they'd look like little unrecognizable stick figures from far away. But with this chibi style, every character had a clear, distinct silhouette, no matter where they were on the screen. It was art solving a tech problem. Absolutely brilliant.
This return to essence idea even applied to the gameplay itself. So director Hiroyuki Ito, he's the guy who invented the series' famous active time battle system years before. He just felt that traditional turn-based combat was, well, boring. You could fall asleep waiting for your turn. Then one day, he's watching a Formula One race of all things, and he sees Ferrari using a new semi-automatic gearbox. A light bulb goes off. What if combat was semi-real-time? You still get to issue commands, but there's a constantly filling meter that creates this awesome sense of urgency. Just think about that. An F1 race inspired one of the most iconic systems in all of gaming. So, the vision was clear, the team was in place, and everything was humming along. But bringing this massive fairy tale to life, well, it turned into an absolute sprint to the finish line. The pressure was just immense.
In the final stages, the team ballooned to over 300 people. They were constantly running out of disk space, which forced them to make some really painful cuts to the game. They had to figure out how to split this epic story across 4 different CDs, and then came the biggest hurdle of all. They were told they had to finish the whole thing 3 months earlier than they had planned.
And to make things even crazier, the schedule was pure chaos. The game was first planned for early 2000. Then it got pushed to summer so they could add some enhancements for the brand new PlayStation 2. But then, their biggest rival, Dragon Quest VII, announced it was coming out in late August. To avoid a head-to-head sales battle that would hurt both games, Square made a radical call. They moved Final Fantasy IX's release date up to July 7th, forcing that insane 3-month crunch on the team.
So, after all that chaos, the game was finally out. But how was it received? And how do we remember it now, a quarter of a century later? Initially, the game sold just under 5 million copies worldwide. And believe it or not, for Square at the time, this was actually seen as a bit of a disappointment. The launch of the PS2, the huge shadow of Dragon Quest, and the fact that it was a big shift away from the futuristic style of the last couple of games, all of that meant sales were lower than they'd hoped.
But the story doesn't end there. Not by a long shot. Through re-releases on new platforms over the next couple of decades, the game found a massive new audience. By 2025, total sales had climbed to nearly 9 million copies. The fairy tale that was initially overlooked had proven that it had a truly timeless appeal.
And really, nothing captures the soul of this game better than this little story. The singer for the theme song, Melodies of Life, was a bit uncomfortable with a lyric in the Japanese version that translates to, "Even if I die." She thought it was just too bleak. Well, the message got back to director Ito, who had written the lyrics himself, and his response was firm and immediate. No matter what, you can't remove that line. It was absolutely essential to the game's core theme, living a full life precisely because we know it's going to end.
And that leaves us with one final thought. In a gaming industry that is now obsessed with photorealism and gritty, serious storytelling, Final Fantasy IX just stands out as this beautiful monument to imagination. It's proof that returning to the origin, focusing on core emotions, on timeless art, on essential truths, can create something that lasts so much longer than the latest technology. So, in our era of hyperrealism, what can we still learn from a simple, profound fairy tale? That's something we're thinking about.